In this lesson, we'll look at a few workflow tips that we can use as we start modeling in Maya. So let's take a look at a few things that are going to help you as you go through the process of modeling. These are things that are good to get in the habit of early on, and so you don't develop any bad habits. And so they're just a few small little tips, and so let's take a look at some of these. Now, we can see our models exist here in our 3D view, but they also exist as nodes here in Maya, and they have relationships to each other. And so we can look at these different object nodes if we go into Window, and we can choose to open up the outliner, or we can choose the hypergraph. So if we look in the outliner, you can see this is a list of all of our objects. Now right now we just have this single bike, and this is actually a group. If I go ahead and hit the plus sign, you can see that it exists in this sort of hierarchy. So we've got the bike, and you can see as I select that, it selects the entire thing. If I select the back tire, it's only selecting the tire. And if I open that up, you can see that it's made of objects here. Okay? And you can see the icons are a bit different. But this is set up so that it kind of goes from the lowest small piece and it's grouped together in logical groups. For instance, this front group here, so that I can turn the bike, and then the tires, and then all the way up to the top. Okay, so we want to make sure that when we're working with our models and building models, the first thing that we want to do is make sure everything is named appropriately. So, it may be easy to tell here in the 3D view what each of these pieces are, but as we're looking at it in here, and then when we start to get into, passing this model off to other people, or someone's going to be rigging it or dealing with it, you need to have some sort of a logical name. You can see that here we have 3 different objects in 3 different locations, and they're all named very similarly: P cylinder, polycylinder, 3, 4, 5. Okay, we want to give it a name that's a little bit more descriptive than that. Same thing with lofted surface. Now, the naming convention itself is going to be different based on wherever it is that you're working. If you're working on your own, you can come up with your own naming convention. A lot of times we'll have a name like a bike at the top, and then let's say everything that is underneath that bike group will be, let's say, start with bike. So bike underscore back tire. So we know that it belongs to the bike no matter what we look at. And then as we go down in the hierarchy, this could be bike back tire A. If it's something where you can't be as descriptive, maybe you can go ahead and just name it that. So you can see that this belongs to this belongs to this. Okay, we can also name these over here in the channel box as well. All right. Now, to actually group items together, if we have items like this tire, you can see these are part of this group. We can actually parent those to groups or group them. Let's just, for an example, hit Shift P. Okay, that'll drop them out of the hierarchy, so they're all separate. So we've got all these separate pieces. Okay, so let's say we want to group these together. Okay, we could take one of these, let's say this, and make it the parent, and then grab all of these and drag it, middle mouse drag it underneath. Okay, and now all these are children of that NURBS. Or we could come in and hit those 3, hit the last one, and hit P on our keyboard to parent those underneath. And so whatever we do to the parent would happen to the children. Or we can create kind of a blank group. Instead of having one of the objects be the parent, the group would be the parent. So all of these would be the children. So we select all of the pieces of the tire, hit Control G, and that'll create a new group. Okay. Now the center of the group by default is located here at the origin, so that's something that we would want to move. Okay, and we can move our pivots by hitting Insert on our keyboard and moving that around. Okay, hitting Insert again to go back, and you want to move that just into the center. Okay, now we have these other pieces that you can see we've grouped together. We've got body, and then we've got body frame, the kickstand, front pivot, and then this piece here, which actually consists of several pieces. Okay, so if we're going to name this body white, if we want to stick with our naming convention, we probably want to go ahead and add bike to the beginning. Okay, and then down here, if we don't really care to give it a completely descriptive name, we can just name it ABC, just to keep everything straight. Okay, If you want to copy that, Control C, Control V to paste, and then just replace the C. You can do that as well. Okay, so you want to make sure your pieces are named, each individual piece. You want to make sure that they're in a hierarchy that makes sense, and that hierarchy is named appropriately as well. Remember, Control G will group. Okay, if we want to take an item out, you can hit Shift P. Okay, hit that, go back to body, Shift P again, drop that out, and then P to parent. Okay, so we can parent objects to other objects, or we can group them together into new groups and then organize the groups, okay, however we want. So think of the naming, think of the hierarchy that you've got going on. All right, and we also want to talk about history and freezing transforms. So when we start to do any sort of modeling, for instance, if we were to come in here and get a cube, okay, keep our eye on this inputs area over here, and we'll go ahead and start to just do some quick modeling. And so I'm just going to, as an example, start to insert some edge loops here. Let's go ahead and grab a face, start to extrude that out, and we'll grab this face, do the same thing. And so as we start to build up, all of these activities are recorded in the object's history. So if we take a look at this, you can see all of these different objects, or all of these different actions, are recorded in this history. So we've got our extrusions, we've got our splits, and so forth. Now there may be instances where we want to come in and change these, although if we change these after the fact, we could get some strange results. You can see as I start to change the subdivisions, it takes it back up through that history and gets some very strange results. So instead of letting that history build up, oftentimes we'll want to delete the history. Okay, and so to do that, we'll just go to Edit, Delete by Type, History, and that will clean that out so that we don't have any of that history. Also, we can freeze our transform. So if we take a look at this, you can see that as I select one part of this model in a 3D view, if I hit the up arrow, I can move up the hierarchy that we saw in our outliner. So hitting up goes to that next level up. Up again goes to the next level up again, and we're looking at the whole model, which in this case doesn't include the tire because we dropped it out. So I'm going to go ahead and drop this back in. So click on this group, middle mouse drag it up to the bike. Okay, hit the up arrow, and you can see that we actually have a Y translation on this. If we zero it out, you can see that it's actually below the grid. And so I wanted to move it up the grid, on top of the grid, so I moved it up in the Y, and that created a value in the translation. But in many cases, we want to now zero this out, but we want our new position to be our zeroed out default position. So to do that, we can go to Modify, Freeze Transformations. Okay. So that will go ahead, and if you see, the transforms are all set to 0, scales at 1, but our object hasn't moved. And so this is our new default position. So if we now were to actually move it around, now those values are calculated from this default value. So if we now zero this out, it's going to pop back on top of the grid. Okay, so there may be cases during the course of our project where we delete history or we freeze transformations or freeze transforms, and so that's what we're talking about. Both of those are found, one's under Edit, Delete by Type, and the other's under Modify, Freeze Transformations. Okay, and as we go, we'll look back on making sure that we name things appropriately and making sure that we set those up in a hierarchy that makes sense for the type of model that we're creating. So it makes our life a little bit easier, and also makes the artists who we're working with, makes their lives a little bit easier when they have to touch the models that we create. So the next thing that we want to talk about is to just get, I think, an overview of the bike and look at some of the different pieces that we're going to create throughout this process. We're going to try to use a lot of different tools, a lot of different techniques, and maybe different types of geometry to create all the different pieces of this bike. And so we'll take a look at a lot of these pieces and talk a little bit more in depth about what we're going to do in this project in the next lesson.